This is the Griffin Realty Group Ask-A-Griffin podcast, episode number 32. Representation continued here. And the question on the table, what are the fiduciary duties of the real estate agent? Are you a home seller or buyer who has questions about selling and buying residential property, but you can't find an easy way to get your answers? Well, then, hey, you are definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the Griffin Realty Group and the host of the Ask-A-Griffin podcast. Now, to help you take immediate action to get started in the right direction, if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the near future, you can take advantage of our free step-by-step guides that are waiting for you at griffincourses.com. That's Griffin, courses.com. All right, get over there and get you the help that you need to be strategic when you engage in this massive financial and emotional transaction. But on the table today, as we continue our series for buyers, we talk about the subject of representation, and the question is, what are the fiduciary responsibilities of the real estate agent? Well, the truth is, it starts off with the question, what is a fiduciary? So I'm going to read you from our seller's course here exactly what a fiduciary is by definition. A fiduciary is a faithful servant or a trusted advisor in a real estate agency relationship. The fiduciary responsibility may include certain legally mandated duties. Okay, so that's generally what it is. And really, I think the key point here is it's a trusted advisor, which when you look at that word trusted, how do we get to that point? Well, we get to that point like this. By education first, by making the consumer, in this case, the buyer real estate consumer, aware of how things really are and how they work. You see, the danger when you get involved in a real estate transaction as a seller or a buyer, and even a real estate agent, is that you are undereducated about the process. And you have to resist that intellectual insecure moment where you say, well, I've done a real estate deal before, I know how it goes. Well, you don't really, because you don't know what you don't know. And as a longtime real estate expert, 21 years of running a brokerage and selling myself to this very day as I record this, and 15 years of coaching it to top producers, I still don't know what I don't know. So you're always in pursuit of more and more micro details and situations that impose themselves upon you that you have to deal with. So get at least to the generally educated stage. And that's what I'm trying to do here for all of you, is give it to you for free so that you can listen to this course, and then you can go to griffincourses.com and download the very book that I just read a definition from, because it's important that you stay empowered in this process, okay? Now, the next point here is, okay, so I referenced that there might be some legal standard for that as well. So I think the next point here is, as I look at this, the idea of a buyer's agent, which is the idea that's on the table. Of course, a seller's agent or a listing agent is a little bit more obvious, but a buyer's agent is a little bit different. So here's really a legal general standard upon which we build this foundation, or that is the foundation. All real estate licensees, regardless of the working relationship with a consumer, by law, must present properties honestly and accurately and disclose known material defects in the real estate. Okay? So again, relatively general, but then we start to broach the subject of the property itself. If we become aware of any material defect, it must be disclosed. So what does that mean? Well, really, that burden in agency, prior to the buyer ever coming, really starts with the seller and the listing agent, the seller's agent. You have to go in there and do all your due diligence about the property itself. And it's really wise. In some states, it's actually mandatory to do a seller's disclosure, to have the seller reveal to you what they know. And of course, there is a lot that you own a house doesn't presume that you know everything. And there are things that are unknown. And you have the right to say unknown. So that sets up for the buyer this caveat emptor, which means buyer beware situation. So now enter this need for this trusted advisor, this buyer agent, to come in and to ask those questions. Is there a seller's disclosure? Are there any material defects in the property? And material defects will leave that open to interpretation to a certain extent, but the obvious things, like, for example, if the property has a foundational issue, it has a structural issue. Is the roof in danger of collapsing? Is the foundation in danger of collapsing? Those are things that are material defects. Are you hiding the fact that the air conditioning system isn't working in the middle of the winter and you don't disclose that? Those are material defects in a property, and there is a legal responsibility to disclose those. Now, I do want to say this too, that in our industry, from our perspective as an agency, we have what's called errors and omissions insurance that we have to buy. And the reason we have to buy it as brokers and for the brokerage and cover all the agents is because there is so much detail involved in any property that it's nearly impossible to get everything perfectly right, or you can end up being surprised by something nobody knew about that comes up at a home inspection. That's why the home inspection has so much weight. Is that as a buyer's agent, one of the most trusted advisory things that you need somebody to do is get you a competent home inspector, and if that leads to other inspections, then that should be the case as well. So you see the burden, you start to see this burden fall upon the shoulders of the buyer's agent to have a very detailed process that they go through to protect the buyer to the best of their ability. And what I always say to people is, look, what do you need? Because, quote unquote, we have an army of contractors and people that can look further into an item. So if we get into this home inspection, sure, I represented you when it comes to the mathematics of the whole situation. I was able to tell you the value. I was able to do an analysis upon which you're empowered to make an informed decision. We were able to talk to the lender and talk about the true costs of closing a loan. All of those things, sure. But when we get to that point where we're talking about the property itself, we need to dig in there deeply and make sure we've done the best vetting process in this tiny period of time, by the way. It's typical for a home inspection contingency date to carry out for about 7 to 10 days. But then that generalist, the person who typically comes in, is going to maybe make some other recommendations for specialists. And so as the buyer's agent, we have to ask for that extension of time. So you see, all of this is going on in a transaction. So do you see why we highly recommend you get a trusted advisor, aka have somebody formally represent you as a buyer's representative, a buyer's agent? It's important. Why are you rushing a transaction that has so many items that are open-ended that need guidance? Now, I will talk about agency to the extent that there are other types of agency that go beyond the standard buyer and seller representative. There are those occasions where there is dual agency that's been agreed upon. And the way that I personally deal with that at my brokerage as a dual agent is that if somebody just will not go get their own buyer agent or doesn't want to deal with one, well then, prior to that ever happening, we've already talked to our seller about how we deal with that. And that is full and ultimate disclosure. Right down to the mathematics. We get the permission of the seller to say, look, here's the math that we use to price this right. And we feel like it's defensible by the math. It's not our opinion. We're not hiding anything. And we want the permission, if we end up in a dual agency situation, to bring the same math to the buyer so that they can come to their conclusion. And then we give guidance to both parties as to where to start. Now, of course, you lose some of the ability for certain things that you can do. But again, I think the premise is that it's all about transparency when it comes to agency. It's very important to be just fully honest, and it makes the process so much easier. But again, the last point in this question on the table, what are the fiduciary duties of the agent? Those are some of the examples. I don't want to drone on for too long about it, but that gives you an idea, and you should sit with a buyer representative and go more detailed into the conversation so you understand what you're going into. Just if there's a bottom line here, stop rushing into a transaction without being prepared to understand the process. That's why we give away free plans. GriffinCourses.com. Get the buyer plan. Read the very thing that I just read a tiny piece from. It's multiple pages, 6 stages of the process. Read it. Be prepared. But remember, like they say in the fight business. Protect yourself at all times. And I'll add, regardless of your representation. So you see, when you come into a home, don't go in there blindly asking the seller for dual agency or hiring a buyer agent, whatever that might mean. By the way, buyer agency doesn't necessarily require you to pay any upfront money. That depends. That's the decision of the agency that you're dealing with. So the key, though, is to understand that you are still fully responsible for being cognizant and aware. See, a good buyer's representative is going to make you aware of the things that you probably don't know about or you can't get the details, and they're going to go fetch them for you. Like a good, trusted advisor. This servant's mentality. We're here to serve. We're here to dig deeper. That should be any agent's real, true, humble calling if they're in this business. But it's important for you to ask the questions that you're thinking about. What are you worried about? Put it on the table. And the easiest way, like I said, is to put that against the process. Okay, where are we at? When we get to the closing, what should I be worried about? Well, you should be paying attention to these critical dates and deadlines. These are the things that you're going to have to adhere to. You should be definitely watching your mortgage contingency if you have one in there. If you have a home sale contingency, we really need to deal with your home. And I know it's in another state. I need to coordinate with your agent there so that we can fully communicate. See, communication is the thing that really protects all parties here. Transparent and honest communication is the standard in general. But again, you are responsible for everything that happens. Now, I'm not saying that in some cases there isn't poor representation, but you should have vetted the situation before you went into a relationship with any agent. Vet it. Don't rush. But let's presume that there is a problem. You can always be represented by an attorney during this process as well, and should be. In fact, for both our sellers and buyers at Griffin Realty Group, we always recommend that we introduce them to several attorneys that they can choose from for the legal guidance. You see, this is where a lot of what we can do ends. We're not licensed home inspectors. We're not licensed electricians, etc. We're not licensed tradespeople necessarily. Some people might overlap. You might find a real estate agent with another license. But it's really important to understand that you're signing legal documents. You're entering into a legal process. So it's always wise to seek the counsel also of a trusted attorney. And as the buyer agent, we can recommend people to you that we have already vetted, that we can trust. Make the introduction. You do your own. Okay? So let me go back and talk about this again. The question that most people don't ask, and they should ask, during this representation discussion, which is the first phase of going through the buyer process if you do it correctly, what are the fiduciary duties of the agent? What are they? And it starts with understanding that a fiduciary is really, that's the concept of trusted advisor. So understand that. Two, there's a legal standard, and that is really just basically stated as full disclosure, but especially if you are aware of any material defects. And the buyer's agent's job is to find that out from the listing agent's job. Or the listing agents set up with the seller. And lastly, protect yourself at all times, like they say in the fight game, regardless of having this representation, because ultimately you're fully responsible for your decisions. All right, I want to summarize it this way. When you're purchasing real estate, you're entitled to representation, and it's highly recommended that you do so. Go get it. Given that real estate transaction includes many details, many of them legal, and it's best to have the advice of a competent and trusted advisor who can orchestrate this whole process for you. All right, remember, you can take immediate action to get started in the right direction, a protective direction, if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the near future by getting a free step-by-step guide for us for all these processes over at griffincourses.com. That's GRIFFIN courses.com. Also, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen so that you don't miss out on any of the insights each time we upload an episode. We also post all of these on our social media channels. So remember, just go over and turn on the notifications for Griffin Realty Group and you won't miss the reminders. We also would appreciate it if you would please share our content with other people just like you so they get the help they need. And feel free to ask us questions wherever you see our content, and we'll try to answer them forthwith so you feel supported. Hey, thanks for listening, but remember this: nobody's coming for you. So go take action and get to work on your own plan for buying or selling property, and we will be here to help you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.